Hi folks, my name is Ron Fournier. I'm the Recreational Safety Supervisor for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I oversee Maine's hunter education program. A big part of hunter education is wilderness survival. And in wilderness survival, we want to know the basics of building fire and shelter, which might just get us through an unforeseen night in the woods. I've got a very basic kit here. This is basically a small tarp with some parachute cord. I've got a little folding saw there, and I've got everything I need right now to go ahead and make a survival shelter. So watch the video and hopefully you'll learn some new skills. A couple of considerations when choosing a site for your survival shelter. You want to make sure that you find a piece of ground that has no rocks or roots so that when you're laying down on the forest floor, it's fairly comfortable. You also want to make sure that it's got maybe a slight slope or fairly flat, so you don't have any water pooling in to the bottom of your shelter if you get some inclement weather. The position of your shelter is important. Our prevailing winds are north-northwest in Maine, and typically poor weather comes from the south. So if I know what the weather looks like coming in, I may position my shelter one way or the other. If it's decent weather out, I may want to have a decent breeze. So just think about that when you're choosing the location. I also want to look overhead. I want to make sure that I'm not within the drop zone of any widowmakers, any broken limbs, rotted wood, trees that look like they're failing in health. And then I want to have two trees that I can anchor my ridge line to. Now when you anchor your ridge line, you've got two basic knots. You're going to tie a bowline to your anchor tree, which allows you to undo that knot when you decide to depart very easily without creating knots in your rope. And then a trucker's hitch to the other side, and that allows me to put a lot of pressure on there, and I can even tighten it up if I need to, if wind or rain slackens my ridge line. Okay, on your anchor tree, you're going to tie what's called a bowline knot. You're going to make a P in your parachute cord like this. You're going to wrap around the tree. You're going to come up through the bottom, around your rope, and back down through the P. And you're going to hold the tail and cinch it up just like that. It looks like a little bow tie. I can put a lot of pressure on that knot, and then when I decide to untie my ridge line and move on, I just flip it over and simply push down, take the tension off, and untie my rope without a knot being permanently put into my parachute cord. On the opposite end, we're going to tie a trucker's hitch. Okay, to tie our trucker's hitch, you want to point toward your anchor tree, and I'm going to wrap a loop around my index finger and pull the line through to create a bite. Then I'm going to pass my paracord through the loop, adjust the height, and then pull pressure using mechanical advantage, pinch my line, and make one loop pulling towards my anchor tree. And then I'm going to just make one more loop just to make sure that's not going to come undone. If I have a lot of wind, rain, snow, and this slacks up, I can go ahead and untie this, retie it, put more pressure on it. And the last thing I'm going to do is I want to keep this off the ground from water, mice, things like that. I'm going to wrap the tail end of this up, and I'm going to just tuck it right into the V here. And that should stay just like that. Okay, so typically I would have my four corner lines all attached to my tarp, but I've got them laid out here. Now on our corners, we're going to go ahead and use a bowline as well. Going to go through the grommet, make your loop, come up through, around, and back down. And I've got a bowline that I can untie when I need to. I'm going to make 4 stakes, and then I'm going to tie a trucker's hitch to my stakes so I can put tension on each one. And if I have to adjust them, it'll be easy enough to do that. So we're going to go ahead and tie all 4 of these. Okay, before I put my tarp over my ridgeline, I want to be thinking about the height of my ridgeline. I want to be able to sit underneath my shelter with a little bit of clearance over my head, but not so much airspace that I've got a lot of weather coming in on the sides of my tarp. So typically right about my hip bone is where I'm going to start. I can adjust that if I have to later on. I'm going to pull my tarp over the ridge line to the center line. This one has a grommet right at the center line, which makes it easier to find the center. Now I'm going to use my folding saw and my knife to make 4 stakes for my corners to pull tension on my corner ropes, making sure I've got a 45-degree angle on each. So to make 4 stakes, I'm going to try to find something that's on the ground, you know, some downed wood or whatnot, and all I need to do is make stakes 8 to 9 inches long. I'm going to use my saw and my knife, put a little chisel point on the end of it, and just push these in just sturdy enough that it's going to hold the corners down. I might be able to just snap the stick as well, but I'm going to go ahead and just cut 4 stakes. When attaching my first stake, I want to make sure that I'm making a 45-degree angle in my rope, and I want to give myself a little bit of room to work with here. Okay, and I'm going to just push that into the ground. Okay, on my last corner, I'm going to make sure I pull tension on that and make sure that I'm pulling equally on all 4 corners. Now a rock or even a small mallet would be helpful, or a piece of wood, to pound those stakes in a little bit further. And I want to pull just enough tension to make sure that there's no slack in the ridge line. Okay, once all 4 of my corners are secure, I'm going to recheck my ridge line, make sure the height is where I want it. On a beautiful day like today, I might want to have an airspace on both of my drip edges to get adequate airflow. Maybe it'll help with the bugs, nice breeze. It could be hot and humid. At night, I'm going to lower that down to the ground with just a little bit of an airspace. And if it's inclement weather, I might lower it even lower. Okay, but I can make adjustments with my anchor and my trucker's hitch on the other side, and then adjust my 4 corners accordingly. The other thing I want to take into consideration is where my fire may be. So I've got a spot right here that I kind of cleared the debris away. Now, if you're going to build a fire, you do want to dig down to mineral soils so we don't create what's called a duff fire. I want to look overhead, make sure I don't have anything that's going to catch on fire. I also want to make sure I'm far enough away from my shelter that I'm not going to melt my tarp or my ridge lines or my corner ropes. If I have a fire in the evening or it's wet weather or whatnot, I can actually stay under my shelter and stay dry and tend to my fire, which will create a little bit of heat. So something to be thinking about. Also want to be considering the drainage, because if it is raining, I don't want the water to kind of pool in where my fire is going to be. So there you have it, folks, a very simple survival shelter using a tarp and some parachute cord. Remember, it's important to practice the skill beforehand before you actually need to use it. And I would try it maybe in your backyard or on a weekend camping trip. Practice it, use it in some favorable weather, maybe some not so favorable weather, and see how you make out. The last thing is always remember to tell somebody where you're going to be and when you're going to be returning, and that way you've got a safety net that somebody will be looking for you.